Welcome to the Whispers of Yomi. Welcome to tonight's story, a journey through the mists of ancient Japan where history blends with mystery. This is boring history for sleep, where the past unfolds slowly and gently, perfect for drifting away. You don't need to remember every detail. Simply find your comfortable position, turn off the lights, and let these ancient whispers guide you to rest. The volume will gradually fade after 50 minutes, allowing you to slip peacefully into dreams. What lies beneath the sacred mountains of ancient Japan? When did the first emperors truly commune with beings beyond our world? Where did the boundaries between myth and reality blur in the chronicles of the Yamato period? Who were the mysterious priests that vanished without explanation in the 3rd century? How did entire temples disappear overnight, leaving only stone foundations and unanswered questions? In the misty valleys of what would become modern Japan, long before the cherry blossoms were celebrated in poetry, there existed a civilization that historians barely acknowledge. The year was approximately 247 CE, during the reign of Empress Himiko, though the records of this time remained frustratingly incomplete. Archaeological evidence suggests that something extraordinary occurred in the mountainous regions of central Honshu, something that the official histories chose to forget. The Yamato court, precursor to Imperial Japan, maintained detailed records of tribute, harvests, and diplomatic relations with China. Yet curiously, there exists a gap in these chronicles spanning nearly 30 years. Modern scholars attribute this to natural decay of documents, but a handful of fragmentary texts discovered in remote temple foundations tell a different story entirely. These fragments speak of the Komi-no-Michi, the path of the gods, not as a spiritual concept, but as a literal route through hidden valleys where divine beings once walked among mortals. Dr. Kenji, a historian at Tokyo University, spent decades studying these fragmentary texts before his mysterious disappearance in 1987. His final papers, discovered in his study months later, described what he called the deliberate erasure of the 3rd century silence. According to Nakamura's research, this period was intentionally removed from official records, not due to shame or defeat, but because the events that transpired challenged the very nature of reality as understood by subsequent generations. The fragments speak of Emperor Sujin, the 10th legendary emperor, though his historical existence remains debated. What makes these particular texts intriguing is their matter-of-fact description of Sujin's regular consultations with beings described as the tall ones with eyes of silver. These consultations supposedly took place in a complex of underground chambers beneath Mount Miwa, chambers that were sealed with bronze plates bearing inscriptions in a script that predates known Japanese writing systems. Archaeological surveys of Mount Miwa have indeed revealed anomalous ground-penetrating radar signatures suggesting large hollow spaces beneath the sacred mountain. However, the Japanese government has consistently denied permits for excavation, citing religious sensitivities. Local Shinto priests maintain that the mountain must remain undisturbed, though when pressed, they cannot explain the origin of this prohibition beyond saying it has always been so. The fragmentary texts describe elaborate rituals performed at the winter solstice, when the boundary between the physical and spiritual worlds was said to be thinnest. These ceremonies involved the presentation of mirrors made from an unknown metal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The mirrors were crafted by artisans whose guild disappeared entirely from historical records after the 3rd century silence. Along with their techniques and knowledge, Contemporary Chinese chronicles from the same period make oblique references to strange lights seen emanating from the Japanese islands, descriptions that modern scholars typically dismiss as aurora activity or volcanic phenomena. However, the timing of these observations corresponds precisely with the periods when the Japanese fragments claim the most significant divine encounters occurred. The Chinese observers described columns of blue-white light rising from the mountains, visible even from the Korean peninsula on clear nights. What adds weight to these accounts is the discovery, in 1962, of a cache of bronze artifacts buried beneath a shrine in Nara. The artifacts bore the same unknown script found in the fragmentary texts, and metallurgical analysis revealed an unusual composition that included trace elements not found in Japanese bronze work of any known period. The artifacts were quietly transferred to a private collection and have not been subject to further scientific study. The most intriguing aspect of the fragmentary texts is their description of a great council that took place in the final year of the 3rd century silence. Representatives from across the Japanese archipelago gathered at a location described only as the valley where time stands still. The purpose of this council was to decide whether humanity was ready for continued contact with the divine beings, or whether such contact should be suspended until a future age. According to the texts, the decision was made to sever the connection, to allow humanity to develop independently without divine guidance. The great temples were dismantled, their stones scattered, and the priests who had served as intermediaries took vows of eternal silence. The valley where time stands still was sealed through methods the texts describe only as the folding of the earth. Modern satellite imagery has identified several geographical anomalies in central Japan that might correspond to this legendary valley. These areas appear as perfect circles of slightly different vegetation, approximately 3 kilometers in diameter, with no obvious geological explanation for their formation. Ground-level investigation of these sites has consistently yielded no significant findings, leading some researchers to speculate about sophisticated ancient engineering techniques designed to conceal rather than reveal. The fragmentary texts conclude with a prophecy of sorts, stating that the seals would weaken over time and that signs of the ancient connection would begin to reappear. These signs would include the discovery of artifacts in impossible locations, the spontaneous appearance of the forgotten script in the dreams of scholars, and the gradual awakening of sensitivity to the divine realm among certain bloodlines descended from the ancient priests. Whether these prophecies hold any validity remains a matter of speculation. However, the increasing number of unexplained archaeological discoveries in Japan, combined with the government's reluctance to permit thorough investigation of certain sites, continues to fuel theories about hidden history and forgotten connections, 2 realms beyond our ordinary understanding. As you drift towards sleep tonight, consider the possibility that beneath the familiar landscape of modern Japan lie layers of mystery that challenge our assumptions about the past. The ancient priests who once walked between worlds left behind only whispers and shadows. But perhaps that is enough to keep their secrets alive in the realm of dreams, where time folds upon itself and the impossible becomes merely improbable. The silver-eyed visitors, the morning mist clings to the valleys of ancient Yamato as we continue our gentle journey through forgotten history. Let your breathing slow and your thoughts settle as we explore the mysteries that historians prefer to leave unexamined. The story unfolds like a river flowing toward the sea, carrying secrets from a time when the world was younger and more strange. When exactly did the silver-eyed ones first appear in the chronicles of early Japan? Where did these mysterious beings originate, and why do official histories make no mention of their presence? What prompted Emperor Shogun to seek their counsel, and how did these encounters shape the foundations of Japanese civilization? Who were the witnesses to these meetings, and why did their testimonies vanish from the records? How did an entire dynasty manage to erase such significant events from the collective memory of a nation? The bronze mirror of Takachiho, discovered in 1923 and subsequently lost in the chaos of World War II, contained inscriptions that provided our most detailed account of the Silver-Eyed Ones. According to the scholar Hiroshi Yamamoto, who studied the mirror before its disappearance, the inscriptions described beings of unusual height and pale complexion, distinguished most notably by their silver-colored eyes that seemed to reflect light in ways that human eyes do not. These beings appeared during the reign of Emperor Shogun, materializing without warning in the sacred groves surrounding Mount Maiwa. Unlike the kami of traditional Shinto belief, they exhibited distinctly physical characteristics and demonstrated knowledge of metallurgy, astronomy, and agricultural techniques far advanced beyond anything known to the Japanese of that era. They spoke in voices that resonated strangely, as though coming from great distances, and their words were understood not through the ears, but directly in the minds of those who heard them. The emperor, initially fearful of these unexpected visitors, consulted with his advisors and the high priests of the nascent Shinto tradition. The consensus, according to the mirror's inscriptions, was that these beings represented a new category of divine intervention, neither fully spirit nor fully flesh. They were granted audience with the imperial court under strict protocols that required purification rituals lasting 7 days and the presence of specific bronze artifacts whose purpose remains unclear. Archaeological evidence supporting these accounts exists in fragmentary form throughout central Japan. Excavations in the Nara region have uncovered bronze implements of unknown function, characterized by their unusual weight and the presence of microscopic silver inlays that form patterns resembling star charts. These implements are invariably found in isolation, never in association with typical grave goods or temple offerings, suggesting they served a specialized purpose that fell outside normal religious or ceremonial practices. The Silver-Eyed Ones purportedly established a residence of sorts in the underground chambers beneath Mount Miwa. These chambers, according to the Lost Mirror's inscriptions, were not excavated by human labor, but formed through techniques that reshaped stone as though it were clay. The chambers contained crystalline formations that provided illumination without flame and mechanisms that regulated temperature and humidity through unknown means. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, a geologist who conducted unauthorized surveys of Mount Miwa in the 1970s, reported finding evidence of artificial cavities at depths that would have been impossible to reach with ancient excavation methods. Her findings were dismissed by the academic establishment, and her research permits were subsequently revoked. Dr. Tanaka's personal notes, discovered after her death in 2003, contained detailed drawings of rock formations that appeared to have been melted and reformed, creating smooth passages that spiraled deep into the mountain's interior. The most significant contribution of the Silver-Eyed Ones to Japanese civilization appears to have been their instruction in advanced metallurgy. The period immediately following their arrival saw a remarkable improvement in the quality of Japanese bronze work, with artifacts from this era exhibiting superior composition and craftsmanship compared to both earlier and later examples. Analysis of these bronze items reveals trace elements and alloy ratios that would not be rediscovered until the development of modern industrial techniques. Equally mysterious is the sudden appearance during this period of agricultural innovations that dramatically increased rice yields across the Yamato region. The silver-eyed ones allegedly taught methods of soil preparation and crop rotation that incorporated principles of what we would now recognize as advanced chemistry and biology. They introduced new varieties of rice that grew faster and required less water, though these varieties disappeared from cultivation shortly after the end of the 3rd century silence. The relationship between the silver-eyed ones and Emperor Su appears to have been one of mutual benefit but underlying tension. The emperor gained access to knowledge and technologies that strengthened his position relative to rival clans, while the beings obtained something that the fragmentary records describe only as the essence of place. Modern interpreters have suggested this might refer to some form of spiritual or energetic connection to the Japanese landscape, though the true nature of this exchange remains speculative. Chinese observers of the period noted unusual phenomena occurring in the Japanese islands. The Chronicle of the later Han describes pillars of silver light rising from the Eastern Sea, and merchants returning from trade missions reported that the Japanese had somehow acquired bronze goods of impossible quality. These accounts, long dismissed as exaggeration or mistranslation, take on new significance when considered alongside the archaeological evidence of advanced metallurgy during the Sujin period. The silver-eyed ones maintained their presence for approximately years, during which time they trained a select group of Japanese artisans and priests in their advanced techniques. These individuals, known as the Jinmi no Tsukasa, or servants of the silver eyes, formed an elite caste within the imperial court. They were recognizable by silver ornaments worn in their hair, and their practice of covering their eyes with thin bronze plates during certain ceremonies. The end of the silver-eyed ones' residency in Japan came suddenly and without clear explanation. According to the fragmentary texts, they simply announced one morning that their work was complete and that they would be withdrawing to allow human civilization to develop independently. The underground chambers beneath Mount Miwa were sealed, using techniques that left no visible evidence of their entrances, and the advanced technologies they had introduced gradually fell out of use as the knowledge required to maintain them was deliberately allowed to fade. What makes this account particularly intriguing is the apparent deliberate nature of the forgetting. Unlike other instances of lost knowledge due to war, disaster, or cultural disruption, the disappearance of the silver-eyed one's contributions seems to have been a conscious choice by subsequent generations. The Jinmei no Tsukasa disbanded voluntarily. Their silver ornaments were buried in unmarked locations, and the bronze plates used in their ceremonies were melted down for other purposes. The psychological impact of this deliberate forgetting may explain why official histories make no mention of the silver-eyed ones. It suggests that the ancient Japanese, having experienced direct contact with beings from beyond their understanding, chose to step back from that contact and return to a more familiar relationship with the spiritual realm. The price of this choice was the loss of remarkable technologies and knowledge, but perhaps the preservation of their cultural independence was deemed more valuable than material advancement as you settled deeper into rest. Consider the possibility that wisdom sometimes requires knowing what to forget as well as what to remember. The silver-eyed ones brought gifts that could have transformed ancient Japan into something unrecognizable, but the decision to let those gifts fade may have been the most profound gift of all, the gift of allowing humanity to find its own path through the mysteries of existence. The whispering stones of Asakathi, ancient capital of Asuka, sleeps beneath layers of time and silence, holding secrets that archaeologists hesitate to fully explore. As we journey deeper into these forgotten mysteries, let your mind relax and your body sink into comfortable rest. The stones of Asuka have been whispering for over 1,000 years, and tonight their voices will guide you gently toward dreams. What purpose did the megalithic stones of Asuka originally serve, and why do they exhibit properties that seem to defy conventional understanding of ancient engineering? When were these massive granite blocks carved with such precision that modern tools can barely match their craftsmanship? Where did the ancient builders acquire the knowledge to position these stones in perfect astronomical alignment? Who ordered their construction, and why do no written records exist of what must have been massive undertaking? How do these stones continue to emit subtle electromagnetic fields that register on sensitive modern instruments? The Asuka region, located in what is now Nara Prefecture, contains the densest concentration of unexplained megalithic structures in all of Japan. Unlike the familiar stone lanterns and torii gates of later Shinto architecture, these ancient constructions serve no obvious religious or practical purpose. They stand in seemingly random locations throughout the valley, their surfaces carved with symbols that predate known Japanese writing systems by several centuries. Professor Masako Ishida of Kyoto University spent 15 years studying the Asuka stones before her research funding was mysteriously withdrawn in 1995. Her unpublished findings, preserved in private archives, document over 200 individual megalithic structures scattered across a 20 square kilometer area. Each stone is positioned with mathematical precision, creating a complex geometric pattern that only becomes apparent when viewed from elevated positions or through aerial photography. The largest of these structures, known locally as the Oni-no or Demon's Toilet, consists of two massive granite blocks weighing approximately 15 tons each, arranged to form a chamber barely large enough for a single person to enter. The interior surfaces are covered with spiral carvings that follow mathematical progressions based on the golden ratio, a concept that was supposedly unknown to ancient Japanese builders. More intriguously, sensitive magnetometers register significant magnetic anomalies within the chamber, with field strengths varying in patterns that correspond to the carved spirals. Geological analysis of the granite used in the Asuka stones reveals composition consistent with formations found over 300 kilometers away in the Japanese Alps. The logistics of transporting such massive blocks across mountainous terrain using ancient methods remains unexplained, particularly given that many of the stones show no evidence of the damage typically associated with primitive transportation techniques. The surfaces remain pristine, as though the stones were somehow moved without the use of ropes. Rollers, or SLEDGES, carbon dating of organic material found in association with the Asuka stones, consistently yields results that confound archaeologists. Charcoal fragments discovered beneath several megalithic structures date to approximately 300 CE, placing their construction during the late Kofan period. However, pollen samples trapped within the carved symbols themselves date to nearly 8 CE, suggesting that the carvings were completed centuries after the stones were positioned. This temporal discrepancy has never been satisfactorily explained by the conventional archaeological methods. Local folklore surrounding the Asuka stones speaks of the Asipako, or voice of stones, a phenomenon that allegedly occurred during specific astronomical events. Residents of the area have long claimed that the stones emit low-frequency humming sounds during lunar eclipses and solar alignments, sounds that can be felt more than heard. Modern acoustic analysis has confirmed the presence of infrasonic emissions, from several of the megalithic structures, though the mechanism producing these sounds remains unknown. The most mysterious aspect of the Asuka stones is their apparent response to human presence. Thermal imaging conducted by university researchers in the 1980s revealed that the stones' surface temperature fluctuates in patterns that correlate with the proximity of human observers. The temperature variations are subtle but consistent, suggesting some form of interaction between the megalithic structures and the bioelectric fields generated by living beings. Dr. Kenji Nakamura, the historian who vanished while researching the 3rd century silence, devoted considerable attention to the Asuka stones in his final papers. According to his notes, the stones were not merely markers or monuments, but components of a larger system designed to facilitate communication across vast distances. He theorized that the megalithic structures formed a network extending throughout ancient Japan, each stone serving as a relay point for transmitting information through methods that predated conventional understanding of physics. Nakamura's research identified similar megalithic structures in other regions of Japan, all positioned along what he termed lines of resonance that follow underground water sources and geological fault lines. His maps of these alignments reveal patterns that correspond remarkably closely to modern seismic activity, suggesting that the ancient builders possessed sophisticated knowledge of geological processes. The stones appear to have been positioned to take advantage of natural electromagnetic phenomena associated with tectonic activity. Archaeological excavations around the Asuka stones have consistently yielded bronze artifacts of unusual design and composition. These objects, typically small discs or rods covered with the same spiral symbols found on the megalithic structures, contain trace amounts of rare earth elements not found in typical Japanese bronze work. Spectrographic analysis suggests that these elements were deliberately added to the bronze alloy, though their purpose remains unclear. The bronze artifacts exhibit interesting properties when brought into proximity with the megalithic structures. Electromagnetic field measurements show that the artifacts act as conductors or amplifiers for the energy emissions from the stones, creating localized field patterns that extend several meters beyond the physical boundaries of the megalithic chamber. This suggests that the artifacts and stones were designed to work together as components of a larger technological system. Contemporary accounts from the Heian period make oblique references to the Asuka stones as the ancient voices and describe rituals performed by Buddhist monks who claimed to receive visions while meditating within the megalithic chambers. These visions allegedly provided insights into future events and the location of lost knowledge, though the specific techniques used to induce these experiences were kept secret by the monastic orders that practiced them. The decline of interest in the Asuka stones coincides with the establishment of Buddhism as the dominant religious tradition in Japan. The megalithic structures associated with older spiritual practices that conflicted with Buddhist doctrine were gradually abandoned and allowed to become overgrown with vegetation. By the medieval period, they were remembered only in local folklore as remnants of a forgotten age when humans possessed abilities that were subsequently lost. Modern attempts to replicate the acoustic properties of the Asuka stones have met with limited success. While engineers can create structures that emit infrasonic frequencies, they cannot reproduce the complex harmonic patterns that characterize the ancient megalithic chambers. The unique geological composition of the Asuka Valley, combined with the precise positioning of the stones, creates resonance effects that appear to require the specific environmental conditions found only in that location. The electromagnetic properties of the Asuka stones continue to attract unofficial research from scientists working outside traditional academic institutions. These investigators report that the stone's energy emissions follow cycles that correspond to astronomical events, with peak activity occurring during planetary alignments and solar maximum periods. However, their findings are rarely published in peer-reviewed journals due to the controversial nature of their implications. As you drift toward deeper rest, imagine the ancient builders of Asuka working by moonlight to position these massive stones with impossible precision. Their knowledge of forces beyond our current understanding allowed them to create structures that continue to whisper secrets across the centuries, reminding us that the past holds mysteries that may be more advanced than our present comprehension. Let these whispers carry you gently into dreams, where the boundaries between stone and spirit dissolve into peaceful oblivion. The vanished temple of Mount Koyaha, in the mountains of the Ki Peninsula, where mist clings to ancient cedar trees like the breath of sleeping spirits. There once stood a temple that exists now only in whispered legends and fragmentary records. As we climb these sacred slopes through the corridors of memory, let your breathing deepen and your thoughts drift like clouds across the peaks. The story of what was lost among these mountains carries the gentle rhythm of temple bells fading into silence. What became of the Mugenji Temple, the temple of the infinite, that disappeared without explanation sometime during the 9th century? When did the last monks abandon their mountain sanctuary, and why do no contemporary records document their departure? Where did the massive bronze Buddha statue vanish to? A statue so large that its dismantling should have required weeks of labor. Who ordered the systematic removal of all evidence that such a temple ever existed? How does an entire religious complex simply fade from history as though it never stood among these sacred peaks? The modern visitor to Mount Koya finds a landscape dotted with ancient temples and monasteries, each with carefully documented histories stretching back over 1,000 years. Yet aerial photography and ground-penetrating radar surveys have revealed the foundations of structures that appear in no official records, foundations that suggest the presence of a temple complex rivaling Tedaji in scale and grandeur. These invisible ruins lie hidden beneath centuries of accumulated forest debris, marked only by subtle depressions in the earth and the occasional glimpse of worked stone beneath the moss. Brother Shen, a monk of the Shingon sect who spent 30 years maintaining the mountain paths, left behind journals that speak of the Mugenji with the casual familiarity of personal experience. Writing in the early 14th century, nearly 500 years after the temple's alleged disappearance, Jishin described walking the ruins during his nightly meditations, noting architectural details that archaeologists have since confirmed through subsurface scanning. His accounts suggest that substantial portions of the temple remain visible well into the medieval period, yet no other contemporary sources acknowledge its existence. According to Jishin's journals, the Mugenji was established during the reign of Emperor Kamu in the late 8th century, founded by a mysterious monk known only as Kokbazu, the Void Monk. This enigmatic figure allegedly arrived at Mount Koya carrying nothing but a bronze mirror of unusual design and claiming to possess knowledge of construction techniques learned from the builders who came before. Within a remarkably short period, he had organized the creation of a temple complex that incorporated architectural elements unknown in Japanese Buddhist construction of that era. The centerpiece of the Mugenji was reportedly a meditation hall. Built entirely without nails or wooden joints, its massive timber beams held together through geometric interlocking principles that distributed weight in ways that defied conventional understanding of structural engineering. The hall could accommodate over 300 monks for group meditation, yet it was said to maintain perfect acoustic properties that allowed the softest whisper from the altar to be heard clearly in the furthest corner. Archaeological evidence for such advanced construction techniques exists in the form of precisely cut stone foundations that show no tool marks or signs of conventional quarrying methods. The stones fit together with tolerances measured in fractions of millimeters, creating foundations that have remained stable for over a millennium despite the seismic activity common to the Japanese archipelago. Modern engineers studying these foundations admit they would be challenging to replicate using contemporary construction methods. The bronze Buddha statue of the Mugenji was described in Jishin's journals as a masterwork of metallurgy and artistry that surpassed even the great Buddha of Nara in both size and craftsmanship. The statue reportedly stood over 20 meters tall and was cast from a bronze alloy that exhibited an unusual blue-green patina that seemed to shift color depending on the viewing angle and lighting conditions. Most remarkably, the statue was said to have been cast in a single piece, a feat that would have required metallurgical techniques far beyond the capabilities of 8th century Japanese craftsmen. Traces of this legendary statue may survive in the form of bronze fragments scattered throughout the Mount Koya region. Local collectors have recovered pieces of worked bronze that exhibit the unusual blue-green patina described in historical accounts, and metallurgical analysis reveals an alloy composition that includes rare earth elements not found in contemporary Japanese bronze work. The distribution pattern of these fragments suggests they originated from the systematic dismantling of a large bronze structure somewhere in the vicinity of the suspected Mugenji site. The monks of the Mugenji were said to practice a form of Buddhism that incorporated elements predating the arrival of Buddhist teachings in Japan. Jishin's journals described meditation techniques that involved precise positioning within the temple complex to take advantage of what he termed earth currents, natural energy flows that enhanced spiritual awareness and facilitated direct communication with enlightened beings from past ages. These practices were apparently so effective that the Mugenji attracted students from across Asia, including monks from India and Central Asia, who made the perilous journey to Japan specifically to study their dot. Contemporary Chinese records make oblique reference to the Mugenji in the form of complaints from Buddhist authorities about Japanese monks who claim to have achieved unprecedented levels of enlightenment through unorthodox methods. These Japanese monks allegedly demonstrated abilities that challenged conventional understanding of human limitations, including apparent immunity to cold during winter mountain retreats and the capacity to remain in deep meditation for weeks without food or water. The sudden disappearance of the Mugenji coincides with a period of increasing orthodoxy within Japanese Buddhism, as various sects worked to establish doctrinal consistency and eliminate practices that deviated from accepted teachings. The temple's emphasis on direct experience over scriptural study, combined with its incorporation of pre-Buddhist spiritual techniques, may have made it a target for elimination by religious authorities seeking to consolidate their control over Japanese spiritual practice. Evidence suggests that the disappearance of the Mugenji was not the result of natural disaster or gradual abandonment, but rather a deliberate and systematic destruction carried out over an extended period. The complete removal of such a large temple complex would have required significant resources and coordination, implying official sanction at the highest levels of government or religious hierarchy. The fact that all written records of the temple were also eliminated suggests a coordinated effort to erase the Mugenji from history entirely. Modern attempts to locate the precise site of the Mugenji have been hampered by the dense forest cover and the religious sensitivities surrounding Mount Koya. mountain remains an active center of Shingon Buddhist practice, and authorities are reluctant to permit excavations that might disturb the spiritual atmosphere of the sacred site. However, satellite imagery and ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted from adjacent peaks have identified large geometric anomalies consistent with the foundation patterns of a major temple complex. The legacy of the Maganji may survive in certain esoteric practices still maintained by isolated mountain hermits throughout the Kii Peninsula. These practitioners, who claim descent from the original monks of the vanished temple, continue to teach meditation techniques that incorporate precise positioning and awareness of natural energy flows. Their methods reportedly produce altered states of consciousness that facilitate access to knowledge and abilities beyond normal human experience. Though such claims remain largely anecdotal and unverified by scientific study, local folklore preserves memories of the Maganji in the form of ghost stories and supernatural encounters reported by travelers through the Mount Koya region. These accounts consistently describe encounters with robed figures who appear at specific locations along mountain paths, offering cryptic guidance or warnings before vanishing without trace. The locations of these reported encounters correspond closely to the suspected site of the lost temple, suggesting that some form of psychic residue may linger at the place where such intensive spiritual practice once occurred. As you allow sleep to embrace you like the morning mist embracing the mountain peaks, consider the possibility that some knowledge is too profound for ordinary preservation. The monks of the Maganji may have discovered truths that could only be maintained through direct transmission from teacher to student. Truths that were lost when the chain of transmission was broken by the temple's destruction. Perhaps in dreams, we can still glimpse the shadows of what was lost, the echo of temple bells ringing across centuries of silence. The Jade Empress and the Forbidden Scrolls and the shadowed archives of history, where dust motes dance in shafts of forgotten sunlight. There exists the story of an empress whose name was deliberately erased from every official record. As we turn these pages that time has tried to tear, let your eyelids grow heavy and your breathing slow. The tale of the Jade Empress unfolds like silk in moonlight, carrying secrets that were meant to sleep forever. What truth lies hidden behind the systematic removal of Empress Midori from the annals of Japanese history? When did she rule from her jade palace that no archaeologist has ever located? Where did she acquire the forbidden knowledge contained in scrolls that her successors feared to preserve? Who were the scholars and scribes that she summoned from across Asia to compile wisdom that challenged the very foundations of reality? How did an entire reign of 37 years vanish so completely that only whispers remain? The existence of Empress Midori, known posthumously as the Jade Empress, can be inferred only through negative space in historical records and the testimonies of foreign observers, who had no reason to participate in the systematic erasure of her legacy. Chinese chronicles of the 10th century make reference to a Japanese empress of extraordinary learning who maintained correspondence with scholars from across the known world. Yet no Japanese source acknowledges her existence. This deliberate omission suggests a coordinated effort to eliminate her memory that extended across generations and multiple imperial administrations. Archaeological evidence for the Jade Empress's reign exists in the form of jade artifacts discovered throughout central Japan, artifacts that bear inscriptions in a script that combines elements of ancient Chinese, Sanskrit, and an unknown symbolic system that may represent the Empress's own creation. These jade pieces, typically small tablets or cylinders, contain what appear to be excerpts from longer texts dealing with subjects ranging from astronomy and mathematics to what can only be described as theoretical physics centuries before such concepts existed in human understanding. The jade itself presents a geological mystery, as it exhibits properties not found in any known jade deposits in East Asia. Spectrographic analysis reveals a unique, crystalline structure that includes trace elements typically associated with meteoritic materials, suggesting that the Empress had access to jade from sources beyond terrestrial origin. The cutting and carving techniques used to create the inscribed artifacts required precision tools and methods that would not be reinvented until the development of modern lapidary equipment. Foreign accounts describe the Jade Palace as a structure that seemed to shift its appearance depending on the time of day and the season. Constructed from materials that reflected light in ways that created the profusion of transparency while maintaining complete opacity. The palace was said to be located in a valley that could only be reached by following specific astronomical alignments, and visitors reported that the journey to reach it seemed to take either no time at all or several days, depending on their state of mind during the approach. The forbidden scrolls compiled under the jade Empress's direction allegedly contained knowledge gathered from sources that included not only the greatest scholars of her time, but also information derived from what the Empress termed the Eternal Library, a concept that modern interpreters have struggled to understand. The scrolls were said to address questions about the nature of time, the structure of reality, and the relationship between consciousness and the physical universe. Topics that would not be seriously considered by mainstream science for another 1,000 years. Contemporary accounts suggest that the Jade Empress possessed an unusual form of longevity that allowed her to rule for nearly 4 decades while maintaining the appearance of a woman in her 20s. Chinese observers attributed this to mastery of Taoist longevity practices, but Indian scholars who visited her court claimed she had transcended ordinary human limitations through techniques unknown to their own spiritual traditions. The Empress herself allegedly claimed that her knowledge came from dreams in which she conversed with beings from distant times and places. The scholarly community that gathered around the Jade Empress included individuals whose expertise spanned disciplines that would not be formally recognized for centuries. There were students of what we would now call psychology, investigating the relationship between mental states and physical reality. Others pursued studies that resembled quantum physics, exploring the fundamental nature of matter and energy. Still others focused on what might be termed consciousness studies, examining the possibility that awareness itself was a fundamental force in the universe. The systematic destruction of the Jade Empress's legacy began immediately after her death, led by her own successor, who claimed that the knowledge she had compiled was too dangerous for human comprehension. The forbidden scrolls were supposedly burned in a ceremony that lasted 7 days and 7 nights, though fragments that escaped destruction suggest that some of the texts were hidden rather than destroyed. The Jade Palace was dismantled stone by stone, its unique materials scattered across distant provinces to prevent any attempt at reconstruction. Evidence of the cover-up can be found in the curious gaps and inconsistencies that characterize official records from the period immediately following the Jade Empress's supposed death. Court documents from the early 11th century contain references to imperial decisions and pronouncements that cannot be attributed to any known ruler, suggesting that the process of erasing the Empress from history was incomplete and that evidence of her reign continued to surface decades after her. Official non-existence was established. The intellectual legacy of the Jade empress may have survived in fragmentary form through secret transmission among scholars who preserved elements of her knowledge through coded texts and symbolic representations. Certain mathematical concepts that appear in Japanese scholarship centuries before they were developed elsewhere may represent fragments of the empress's advanced understanding passed down through hidden lineages of students who maintained their studies in secret. Modern attempts to locate the site of the Jade Palace have focused on geological anomalies and electromagnetic signatures that might indicate the presence of the unusual materials described in historical accounts. Satellite surveys have identified several locations in central Japan where the vegetation patterns and mineral content of the soil suggest the former presence of structures containing high concentrations of rare earth elements. Though none of these sites have been subjected to detailed archaeological investigation, the philosophical implications of the Jade Empress's alleged discoveries continue to resonate with contemporary researchers working at the intersection of consciousness studies and quantum physics. Her purported insights into the observer effect and the role of awareness in determining physical reality anticipate concepts that are only now being seriously explored by mainstream science. If even a portion of the attributed knowledge represents genuine discovery rather than later attribution, it suggests that human understanding of reality has followed a path that included significant losses as well as gains. Local traditions in certain mountain regions of Japan preserve legends of the Jade Lady, a figure who appears to seekers of knowledge during times of great personal or cultural transition. These appearances are said to involve the transmission of information that proves to be precisely what the seeker needs to solve their particular problem, though the knowledge often comes in symbolic or metaphorical form that requires interpretation. The locations of these reported encounters cluster around areas where jade artifacts bearing the Empress's script have been discovered, suggesting a connection between the physical remnants of her reign and ongoing spiritual phenomena. The most intriguing aspect of the Jade Empress's story lies not in what was preserved, but in what was deliberately forgotten. The systematic nature of her erasure from history implies that her knowledge posed a threat not merely to political stability, but to fundamental assumptions about the nature of reality itself. The Forbidden Scrolls may have contained discoveries that would have accelerated human development by centuries, but at the cost of disrupting the gradual evolution of consciousness that her successors believed was necessary for humanity's long-term survival as you settle into the embrace of sleep. Consider the possibility that some knowledge waits patiently in the shadows of history, preserved not in books or monuments, but in the dreams of those who seek truth with sufficient dedication. The Jade Empress may have discovered that the greatest wisdom lies not in accumulating information, but in understanding when to remember and when to forget, when to reveal and when to conceal. Let her gentle wisdom guide you into dreams where jade light illuminates pathways between worlds that exist beyond the boundaries of ordinary time. The celestial cartographers of Heian, the court of Heiankyo, glitters with silk and ceremony. Yet beneath its refined elegance lies a mystery that astronomers and historians continue to debate in whispered conferences. As we enter the halls where nobles once composed poetry by moonlight, let your mind drift like incense smoke toward the realm where dreams and ancient knowledge intertwine. The story of the Star Watchers, who mapped impossible heavens, carries the rhythm of cosmic music too subtle for waking ears to perceive. What drove the court astronomers of the Heian period to create star charts that depicted celestial objects not visible to the naked eye? When did these learned men begin recording the positions of stars that would not be officially discovered until the invention of the telescope? Where did they acquire the mathematical knowledge necessary to calculate planetary orbits with accuracy that rival modern computer models? Who authorized the construction of the underground observatory that lies sealed beneath the ruins of the old imperial palace? How did ancient Japanese astronomers achieve observations that suggest access to optical instruments centuries before such technology existed? The Heian period, spanning roughly from 794 to 1185 CE, is remembered primarily for its artistic and literary achievements. Its elegant court culture that produced masterworks like the Tale of Genji and countless volumes of exquisite poetry. Yet hidden within the archives of this refined civilization are astronomical records that challenge our understanding of both ancient Japanese science and the development of observational astronomy worldwide. These records, preserved in the private collections of noble families who inherited them from their court ancestors, contain star charts and calculations that should have been impossible given the technological limitations of the time. The most remarkable of these documents is the Tenshi-zu, or Map of Heaven and Earth, a series of silk scrolls that present detailed charts of the night sky as viewed from the latitude of Kyoto. The charts include not only the familiar constellations, visible to observers without optical aid, but also the precise positions of stars, too faint to be seen by the human eye under normal conditions. Modern astronomical software confirms that these positions are accurate for the dates indicated on the scrolls, despite the fact that many of the charted objects would not be catalogued by Western astronomers until the 19th and 20th centuries. The creator of the Tenshi-zu was Abe Nosime, the legendary onmyoji whose mastery of astronomy and divination made him one of the most influential figures at the Heian court. Historical records confirm Sime's existence and his role as the court's premier specialist in Chinese-style astronomy and calendar calculation. But they make no mention of the advanced observational techniques that would have been necessary to create the detailed star charts attributed to him. The precision of his celestial maps suggests access to optical instruments with magnifying power equivalent to small telescopes. Yet no such devices are known to have existed in 10th century Japan. Archaeological evidence for advanced astronomical observation in Heian period Japan exists in the form of precisely aligned stone markers found throughout the Kyoto region. These markers, typically granite pillars approximately 2 meters in height, are positioned to mark key astronomical events, such as solstices, equinoxes, and the rising points of specific stars. The accuracy of their alignment exceeds what could be achieved through naked eye observation alone, suggesting the use of sophisticated measuring instruments that left no other trace in the archaeological record. The underground observatory beneath the old imperial palace was discovered during subway construction in 1981, when workers broke through into a chamber that had been sealed for over 800 years. The chamber contained the remains of bronze instruments, whose purpose could only be determined through comparison with much later European astronomical devices. Among these instruments were astrolabes of unprecedented complexity, armillary spheres, with gear ratios that suggest mechanical computation of planetary positions, and bronze mirrors arranged in configurations that appear designed to gather and focus starlight. The most puzzling discovery in the underground observatory was a bronze disc covered with symbols that combine Chinese astronomical notation with mathematical concepts that would not be formally developed until the European Renaissance. The disc appears to be a calculating device for determining planetary positions years or decades in advance, incorporating corrections for orbital irregularities that were not officially recognized by European astronomers until the work of Kepler in the 17th century. Contemporary accounts from visiting Chinese scholars describe astronomical observations conducted at the Heian court that produced results far superior to those achieved in China itself. Despite Japan's supposed status as a cultural tributary that received its scientific knowledge second-hand from Chinese sources, these accounts speak of Japanese astronomers who could predict eclipses with perfect accuracy decades in advance, and who maintained calendars that never required correction, despite the gradual drift that plagued calendar systems throughout the rest of the world. The secret of the Heian astronomers' success may lie in their integration of astronomical observation with spiritual practices derived from both Shinto and Buddhist traditions. Unlike their Chinese counterparts, who viewed astronomy primarily as a technical discipline serving political and agricultural needs, the Japanese court astronomers appear to have developed methods that combined precise observation with intuitive insights gained through meditative practices. This synthesis of scientific method and spiritual discipline may have enabled them to perceive patterns and relationships that escaped purely rational analysis. The decline of advanced astronomical knowledge in Japan coincides with the rise of the warrior class and the gradual decline of court culture during the late Heian period. As political power shifted from the refined nobles of Kyoto to the rough military leaders who would establish Japan's feudal system, the resources and cultural support necessary for sophisticated astronomical research disappeared. The underground observatory was sealed, the bronze instruments were buried, and the knowledge they represented was allowed to fade into legend. Evidence suggests that some of the Heian astronomers' knowledge survived through secret transmission within certain court families, particularly those associated with the On-myoji tradition that continued to provide divination and calendar services to the imperial court even after the establishment of military government. These families maintained private libraries containing astronomical texts and calculation methods that were not shared with outside scholars, preserving fragments of advanced knowledge that occasionally surfaced in later periods. The mathematical techniques employed by the Heian astronomers appear to have included concepts equivalent to what European mathematicians would later develop as analytical geometry and calculus. Bronze tablets, discovered in association with the underground observatory, contain calculations that demonstrate understanding of infinite series, differential methods for determining rates of change, and geometric techniques for calculating areas under curves. These mathematical tools would have been essential for the precise orbital calculations evident in the Tenchizu star charts. Modern attempts to replicate the observational achievements of the Heian astronomers using only the instruments and methods supposedly available to them have met with limited success. Even with careful attention to optimal viewing conditions and the use of replica bronze instruments based on archaeological discoveries, contemporary researchers cannot match the precision and scope of the ancient observations. This suggests that the Japanese court astronomers possessed techniques or equipment that have not been preserved in the historical record. The philosophical implications of the Heian astronomers' achievements extend beyond the history of science. Two questions about the nature of knowledge itself. Their apparent ability to perceive celestial phenomena beyond the reach of their instruments suggests that consciousness itself may play a more active role in observation than is recognized by conventional scientific methodology. The integration of meditative practice with astronomical research may have enhanced their perceptual abilities in ways that enabled detection of subtle phenomena invisible to ordinary observation. Recent analysis of the Heian astronomical records using computer modeling and statistical methods has revealed patterns that suggest the ancient observers had access to information about long-term astronomical cycles that extend far beyond human observation periods. Their calculations appear to incorporate corrections for stellar proper motion, precession effects, and orbital perturbations that would require centuries of continuous observation to detect and quantify. This implies either an impossibly long tradition of precise record-keeping or access to knowledge from sources beyond normal human observation as you drift toward the peaceful realm of sleep. Imagine the Heian court astronomers standing on the rooftops of their palaces, eyes raised to skies that revealed secrets invisible to ordinary sight. Their patient vigils beneath the stars connected them to cosmic rhythms that pulse beneath the surface of everyday awareness. Rhythms that still echo in the dreams of those who listen with sufficient stillness. The mirror makers of Yamashiro, in the workshops of ancient Yamashiro province, where the sound of bronze being hammered into perfect roundness echoed through valleys thick with morning mist. There worked artisans whose skills transcended the ordinary boundaries of metalcraft. As we enter these forge-lit chambers where fire and metal danced in sacred union, let your breathing match the rhythm of the ancient bellows, slow and steady and deep. The story of the mirror makers carries the weight of bronze and the lightness of captured moonbeams. A tale that reflects truths too profound for ordinary understanding. What secret knowledge allowed the bronze workers of Yamashiro to create mirrors that reflected not only images, but somehow captured the essence of what they showed? When did these master craftsmen first discover the alchemical processes that produced bronze alloys unknown to metallurgists in any other civilization? Where did they learn to forge mirrors that remained perfectly reflective for centuries, while ordinary bronze developed patina and corrosion? Who taught them the mathematical principles necessary to create curved surfaces that focused light in ways that seemed to violate optical laws? How did mirrors crafted over 1,000 years ago continue to exhibit properties that modern materials science cannot fully explain? The province of Yamashiro, encompassing the area around present-day Kyoto, was renowned throughout ancient Japan for the exceptional quality of its bronze mirrors. These mirrors, prized by nobles and temples alike, were distinguished not merely by their superior craftsmanship, but by their apparent ability to maintain perfect reflectivity indefinitely. Unlike bronze mirrors produced elsewhere, which developed the characteristic green patina of oxidized copper within decades of their creation, the Yamashiro mirrors retained their original luster across centuries of use. The master craftsman responsible for the most extraordinary of these mirrors was Kagami no Takumi, whose name translates roughly as mirror artisan, and who may have been more title than personal name. Historical records provide few details about his life, noting only that he appeared in the capital sometime during the early 9th century, established a workshop that trained dozens of apprentices, and disappeared as mysteriously as he had arrived. After producing what contemporaries described as the most perfect mirror ever created in Japan, this legendary mirror, known as the Mugen Kagami, or Infinite Mirror, was reportedly forged for Emperor Saga himself and possessed properties that transcended ordinary reflection. Witnesses claimed that the mirror showed not only the viewer's physical appearance, but also revealed hidden aspects of their character and destiny. More remarkably, the mirror allegedly retained images of everyone who looked into it, creating a visual record that could be accessed by subsequent viewers under specific conditions. Teleological analysis of surviving Yamashiro mirrors reveals bronze alloys that include trace elements not found in the copper and tin ores available in ancient Japan. Spectrographic examination has identified the presence of rare earth metals and unusual isotopic ratios that suggest the use of materials from sources unknown to conventional archaeology. The bronze exhibits a crystalline structure that should not be possible given the forging techniques supposedly available to ancient metalworkers. The workshop of Kagami no Takumi was located in a valley that is now part of modern Kyoto, but which archaeological surveys suggest was once the site of extensive mining operations. Core samples from the area reveal evidence of excavation techniques that produced perfectly circular shafts extending to depths that would have been impossible to achieve using traditional Japanese mining methods. The spoil piles from these excavations contain materials that do not correspond to the geology of the surrounding region contemporary. Accounts describe the mirror-making process as involving not only traditional metalworking techniques, but also rituals that incorporated elements of both Shinto purification and Buddhist meditation practices. The craftsmen reportedly worked only during specific phases of the moon, using bronze that had been consecrated through ceremonies lasting several days. The polishing process alone required months of work, with each mirror surface receiving hundreds of hours of attention from artisans who had trained for decades to achieve the necessary precision. The mathematical principles underlying the Yamashiro mirror's optical properties appear to have incorporated concepts that would not be formally recognized until the development of non-Euclidean geometry in the 19th century. The curved surfaces follow mathematical progressions that create focusing effects impossible to reproduce using conventional spherical or parabolic curves. Modern optical engineers studying these ancient mirrors admit they cannot determine how the curvatures were calculated or achieved. Using the tools supposedly available to ancient craftsmen, foreign visitors to the Yamashiro workshops left accounts that describe witnessing metallurgical processes that defied their understanding of the properties of bronze. Chinese observers noted that the Japanese craftsmen seemed able to work bronze at temperatures much lower than those required by conventional smelting techniques, and that the finished mirrors possessed a hardness and durability exceeding that of the finest Chinese bronze work. Indian merchants reported seeing mirrors that appeared to generate their own light, glowing softly even in complete darkness. The decline of the Yamashiro mirror-making tradition coincides with the political upheavals of the late Heian period, as the focus of Japanese civilization shifted from courtly refinement to military pragmatism. The workshops that had produced mirrors for nobles and temples found little demand for their products from the emerging warrior class, which valued practical weapons and armor over contemplative luxuries. The knowledge and techniques that had been passed down through generations of master craftsmen were allowed to fade into obscurity. Evidence suggests that the disappearance of the mirror-making tradition was not entirely due to changing social conditions, but may have been deliberately hastened by religious authorities who viewed the mirror's unusual properties as potentially dangerous. Buddhist monks who had initially commissioned mirrors for temple use began to express concerns about devices that seemed to blur the boundaries between the material and spiritual realms. Several temples destroyed their collections of Yamashiro mirrors during purification ceremonies, intended to eliminate objects associated with inappropriate spiritual practices. The legendary Mukan Kagami disappeared from historical records shortly after Emperor Saga's death, though legends claim it was not destroyed but rather hidden in a location known only to a secret lineage of imperial custodians. This mirror, if it still exists, would represent the pinnacle of ancient Japanese metallurgical achievement and might provide insights into techniques that have been lost to modern civilization. Occasional reports of its rediscovery surface in scholarly circles, but none have been confirmed through rigorous investigation. Modern attempts to recreate the Yamashiro mirrors using traditional Japanese metalworking techniques have produced results that superficially resemble the ancient examples but lack their extraordinary optical properties and durability. Contemporary metallurgists, working with historical methods, can create mirrors that achieve adequate reflectivity. But these modern recreations develop patina and lose their clarity within years. Rather than maintaining perfection across centuries, the philosophical implications of the Yamashiro mirrors extend beyond questions of metallurgical technique to deeper mysteries about the relationship between consciousness and reflection. If the mirrors truly possessed the ability to retain and reveal images beyond ordinary physical reflection, they suggest technologies that operated on principles not recognized by contemporary materials science. The integration of spiritual practice with metalworking may have enabled the ancient craftsmen to manipulate matter in ways that transcended purely mechanical processes. Certain Shinto shrines throughout the Kyoto region preserve mirrors that are claimed to be authentic products of the Yamashiro workshops, though these artifacts are rarely displayed publicly and have not been subjected to scientific analysis. The shrine keepers maintain that the mirrors continue to exhibit unusual properties, including the ability to reveal information about the spiritual condition of those who gaze into them with proper preparation and reverence. These claims remain largely anecdotal, but the consistency of reports across multiple shrine locations suggests the possibility of genuine phenomena. The legacy of the Yamashiro mirror makers survives in certain traditional crafts that maintain techniques allegedly derived from the ancient workshops. These artisans work in small family studios scattered throughout the former Yamashiro province, producing mirrors and other bronze objects using methods that have been passed down through generations of secret transmission. Their products, while lacking the legendary properties of the ancient mirrors, exhibit craftsmanship that exceeds contemporary commercial bronze work in both beauty and durability. The floating gardens of Lake Biwa crossed the serene surface of Lake Biwa, where morning mist rises like the breath of sleeping dragons. There once floated agricultural marvels that fed thousands while defying every principle of conventional farming. As we drift across these ancient waters toward mysteries that lie submerged beneath centuries of accumulated sediment, let your consciousness float as gently as lotus blossoms on still water. The story of the floating gardens carries the rhythm of waves, lapping against impossible shores. What engineering principles allowed the builders of Lake Biwa's floating gardens to create agricultural platforms that remained stable and productive for over 3 centuries? When did these remarkable installations first appear on Japan's largest freshwater lake? And why do no contemporary agricultural manuals describe their construction methods? Where did the ancient farmers acquire the botanical knowledge necessary to develop crop varieties that thrived in the unique conditions of floating cultivation? Who organized the complex logistics required to maintain agricultural communities that existed entirely on the water? How did floating gardens that supported populations in the thousands simply vanish without leaving traces that modern lake surveys can definitively identify? Lake Biwa, stretching across the heart of what is now Shiga Prefecture, has served as a crucial water source and transportation route throughout Japanese history. Yet beneath its placid waters lie the remnants of an agricultural system that challenges our understanding of both ancient Japanese engineering and sustainable farming practices. Sonar surveys conducted in the 1970s revealed geometric patterns on the lake bottom that correspond to the foundations of structures too large and complex to be explained as simple fishing platforms or boat moorings. The floating gardens, known in fragmentary historical records as the Yukushima or floating islands, were first established during the early Heian period by a group of agricultural innovators led by a figure identified only as Mizuno Takumi, the water artisan. This mysterious individual allegedly arrived at Lake Biwa with detailed plans for constructing self-sustaining agricultural platforms that could support not only crops, but entire communities of farmers and their families. The platforms were designed to rise and fall with seasonal lake level changes while maintaining perfect stability for agricultural operations. Archaeological evidence for the floating gardens exists in the form of specialized tools and ceramic vessels recovered from the lake bottom during systematic surveys. These artifacts exhibit designs that appear specifically adapted for aquatic agriculture, including unique irrigation systems that would have allowed precise control of water levels around individual crops and harvesting implements designed to work from unstable floating platforms. The ceramic vessels include storage containers with capacities, suggesting agricultural production on a commercial scale. The construction techniques used to create the floating gardens appear to have incorporated principles of hydrostatic engineering that were far advanced beyond anything documented in contemporary Japanese or Chinese agricultural texts. The platforms were reportedly built using a combination of bamboo frameworks, waterproof plant fiber membranes, and carefully calculated ballast systems that maintained stability while allowing controlled buoyancy adjustments. The engineering required to achieve this level of sophisticated floating construction would challenge even modern marine architects. Contemporary accounts describe the floating gardens as occupying nearly a quarter of Lake Biwa's surface area. At their peak development, creating an agricultural landscape that resembled a floating city more than a farming operation. The platforms were connected by an intricate network of channels and bridges that allowed movement of people, goods, and water throughout the floating community. The largest individual platforms purportedly supported complete farming compounds, including houses, storage facilities, and workshops for maintaining agricultural equipment. The crops grown on the floating gardens included not only traditional Japanese agricultural staples, like rice and vegetables, but also species that were unknown elsewhere in Japan and whose origins remain mysterious. Botanical analysis of preserved seeds recovered from lake bottom deposits has identified varieties of rice that exhibit genetic characteristics not found in any known Japanese cultivars, suggesting either extensive selective breeding programs or the introduction of varieties from distant geographical sources. The irrigation systems of the floating gardens incorporated principles of hydraulic engineering that demonstrate sophisticated understanding of fluid dynamics and water management. The platforms included networks of channels, reservoirs, and lifting devices that allowed precise control of water distribution throughout the floating agricultural areas. Some of these hydraulic systems appear to have operated automatically, using water pressure and gravity to regulate irrigation without constant human intervention. The social organization of the floating garden communities appears to have been remarkably egalitarian, with decisions about agricultural planning and resource allocation made through councils that included representatives from all floating platforms. This democratic approach to agricultural management was unusual in a society otherwise organized around rigid hierarchical principles, suggesting that the unique conditions of floating cultivation encouraged social innovations as well as technological 1. The decline of the floating gardens began during the late Heian period, coinciding with climate changes that affected the water levels and seasonal patterns of Lake Biwa. Extended periods of drought made the floating platforms difficult to maintain, while unusually heavy rainfall caused destructive flooding that damaged both crops and infrastructure. The agricultural communities that had thrived on the water for centuries found themselves unable to adapt to the changing environmental conditions. Evidence suggests that the abandonment of the floating gardens was not entirely due to environmental factors, but may have been hastened by political pressures from mainland agricultural interests, who viewed the floating communities as economic competitors. The floating gardens' ability to produce large quantities of high-quality crops, using relatively small amounts of traditional farmland, threatened the economic position of conventional farmers, who may have lobbied for restrictions that made floating agriculture economically unviable. The final disappearance of the floating gardens is shrouded in mystery, with some accounts suggesting that the platforms were deliberately sunk to prevent their agricultural techniques from being copied by rival communities. Other sources claim that the floating communities simply sailed away en masse, taking their platforms and knowledge to other lakes or coastal areas where they could continue their unique form of agriculture without interference. The truth of these claims remains unverified, as no other locations in Japan show evidence of similar floating agricultural systems. Modern attempts to locate the precise positions of the ancient floating gardens have been complicated by centuries of sedimentation and the gradual changes in Lake Biwa's shoreline and depth profile. However, satellite imagery combined with underwater archaeological techniques has identified several areas where the lake bottom shows geometric patterns consistent with the remains of large artificial structures. These sites await detailed investigation that might reveal the engineering secrets of the ancient floating platforms. The botanical legacy of the floating gardens may survive in certain rice varieties grown around Lake Biwa that exhibit unusual characteristics not found in other Japanese cultivars. These varieties reportedly require less water than typical rice plants while producing higher yields, suggesting possible genetic inheritance from the specialized crops developed for floating cultivation. Genetic analysis of these modern varieties might provide insights into the agricultural innovations of the ancient floating communities. Contemporary environmental scientists studying sustainable agriculture have expressed interest in the floating garden concept as a potential solution to problems of land scarcity and climate change adaptation. The ancient platform's ability to maintain productivity despite seasonal water level changes and their integration of aquaculture with conventional agriculture offer models for developing resilient food production systems that could adapt to changing environmental conditions. The philosophical implications of the floating gardens extend beyond agricultural technique to questions about humanity's relationship with natural systems. The floating communities developed ways of living that worked with, rather than against, natural processes, creating agricultural systems that enhanced, rather than depleted, the ecological health of Lake Biwa. This approach to environmental stewardship offers lessons for contemporary efforts to develop sustainable relationships between human communities and natural ecosystems. As you allow your consciousness to float like a lotus blossom on the still waters of approaching sleep, consider the ancient farmers who learned to live in harmony with the rhythms of lake and season. Their floating gardens represent a vision of agriculture as partnership rather than conquest, of human creativity working in collaboration with natural forces to create abundance that benefits all life. The last shamans of Hokkaido, in the northernmost reaches of the Japanese archipelago, where winter winds carry whispers from the edge of the world. There once lived spiritual practitioners whose abilities bridged the gap between the human and more than human realms. As we journey into these snow-covered forests where ancient spirits still roam, let your breath slow like the hibernating bear and your thoughts quiet like fresh snow falling on pine boughs. The story of the last shamans unfolds in the language of dreams and visions, where time moves in spirals rather than straight lines. What knowledge did the indigenous shamans of Hokkaido possess that allowed them to communicate across species barriers and perceive events occurring at great distances? When did the last of these spiritual intermediaries disappear from the forests and mountains they had served for countless generations? Where are the sacred sites that still echo with the power of their rituals and ceremonies? Who recorded the final teachings of these keepers of ancient wisdom before their traditions vanished beneath the tide of modernization? How did shamanic practices that connected practitioners directly to the consciousness of animals and natural forces survive in secret long after their official suppression? The Ainu people of Hokkaido maintained shamanic traditions that extended back into the mists of prehistory, spiritual practices that recognized the consciousness and sacred nature of all beings within the natural world. These shamans, known as Tusukuru, served as intermediaries between human communities and the complex web of relationships that connected all life in the northern wilderness. Their abilities to communicate with animals, predict weather patterns, and locate lost people or objects were accepted as natural expressions of spiritual training rather than supernatural phenomena. The most renowned of the late-period Innu shamans was a woman known as Yukiona Kami, whose name translates roughly as Snow Woman Spirit. Historical records from the early 20th century describe her as possessing abilities that seem to transcend ordinary human limitations, including apparent immunity to extreme cold and the capacity to travel vast distances through snow-covered terrain in impossibly short periods of time. Her spiritual practices incorporated elements that predated the arrival of Buddhist and Shinto influences in Hokkaido, representing perhaps the last pure expression of ancient animistic traditions. Archaeological evidence for the shamanic traditions of Hokkaido exists in the form of ritual sites scattered throughout the island's remote regions. Locations marked by carefully arranged stone circles and wooden posts that align with astronomical events and seasonal changes. These sites exhibit evidence of use spanning many centuries, with layers of offerings and ceremonial materials that provide insights into the evolution of shamanic practices over time. The most significant of these sites are located in areas that remain difficult to access even with modern transportation, suggesting the importance of isolation and wilderness connection in shamanic training. The sacred objects used by Innu shamans included carved wooden figures known as ina or ritual, sticks that served as spiritual antennae for communicating with kami, the divine spirits that inhabited all aspects of the natural world. These objects exhibit carving techniques and symbolic representations that demonstrate sophisticated understanding of spiritual principles and natural processes. Modern analysis of surviving Innu reveals wood treatment processes that preserved the carved figures for centuries while maintaining their spiritual potency. Contemporary accounts from Japanese ethnographies who studied Innu culture in the early 20th century describe shamanic rituals that involved apparent communication with animal spirits and the ability to perceive events occurring beyond the range of ordinary senses. These observers, despite their cultural biases and scientific skepticism, consistently reported phenomena that challenged their understanding of human capabilities. Their detailed notes preserve descriptions of rituals and practices that might otherwise have been lost to cultural suppression and assimilation. The shamanic worldview of the Ainu recognized the consciousness and spiritual significance of all natural phenomena, from individual animals and plants to weather patterns and geological features. This animistic perspective enabled shamans to develop relationships with natural forces that facilitated survival in the harsh conditions of the northern wilderness. Their ability to predict avalanches, locate game animals, and navigate through blizzards represented practical applications of spiritual knowledge that had been refined through generations of direct experience. The decline of Ainu shamanic traditions began with the Meiji government's policies of cultural assimilation that sought to integrate the indigenous population into mainstream Japanese society. These policies included the suppression of traditional spiritual practices, the forced adoption of Japanese language and customs, and the prohibition of ceremonial activities that were deemed incompatible with modern civilization. The traditions that had sustained Ainu communities for millennia were driven underground or abandoned entirely within a few generations. Evidence suggests that some shamanic knowledge survived the period of official suppression through secret transmission within certain Ainu families who maintained traditional practices in hidden locations. These surviving practitioners, known to outsiders only through rumors and occasional glimpses, continued to serve their communities as healers and spiritual advisors, while carefully concealing their activities from government authorities. Their knowledge represented fragments of a once comprehensive spiritual system that had been adapted for survival under hostile conditions. The last confirmed Tuzukuru, an elderly man known as Kumakami or Bear Spirit, disappeared into the mountains of central Hokkaido in 1967, shortly after being interviewed by a folklore researcher who was documenting vanishing cultural traditions. His final recorded statements described a spiritual landscape that was rapidly becoming uninhabitable for beings like himself. As the expansion of industrial civilization eliminated the wilderness areas necessary for maintaining connection with the natural world, he predicted that the shamanic traditions would enter a period of dormancy but would eventually re-emerge when humanity rediscovered its need for spiritual relationship with the natural world. Modern research into Ainu shamanic traditions has been hampered by the cultural sensitivity surrounding indigenous rites and the limited number of surviving practitioners willing to share traditional knowledge with outsiders. However, certain aspects of shamanic practice appear to have been preserved within Ainu cultural revival movements that seek to maintain traditional arts, crafts, and ceremonial practices. These contemporary expressions of Ainu culture may contain fragmentary elements of shamanic knowledge that could provide insights into the spiritual technologies of the past. The ecological knowledge embedded within Ainu shamanic traditions represented sophisticated understanding of natural systems and sustainable relationship with wilderness environments. Shamanic practices included detailed knowledge of plant medicines, animal behavior patterns, and ecological relationships that enabled small human communities to thrive in challenging northern environments without depleting the natural resources on which they depended. This traditional ecological knowledge offers potential insights for contemporary environmental management and conservation efforts. Scientific studies of traditional healing practices have identified several plant medicines used by Ainu shamans that exhibit genuine therapeutic properties, suggesting that at least some aspects of shamanic knowledge represented empirically valid discoveries about the medicinal properties of northern flora. The shamanic understanding of these plants appeared to extend beyond simple pharmacological effects to encompass holistic approaches to healing that addressed spiritual and psychological as well as physical aspects of illness. The psychological and spiritual techniques employed by Innu shamans included methods for entering altered states of consciousness that facilitated communication with animal spirits and perception of normally hidden aspects of reality. These techniques, which involve combinations of rhythmic drumming, chanting, and exposure to extreme environmental conditions, may have triggered neurological states that enhanced pattern recognition and intuitive processing of environmental information. Contemporary research into consciousness and spirituality has identified similar phenomena in other shamanic traditions worldwide. The prophetic traditions of Innu shamanism included detailed predictions about environmental changes and cultural disruptions that would affect the northern regions in future generations. These prophecies, preserved in oral traditions that have survived despite cultural suppression, describe environmental degradation, climate instability, and the eventual need for humanity to redevelop spiritual relationships with natural systems. The accuracy of some of these predictions has attracted attention from researchers studying traditional ecological knowledge and indigenous wisdom traditions. Contemporary Innu activists and cultural preservationists work to maintain connections to traditional knowledge while adapting shamanic principles to address modern challenges. The Eternal Returners, our journey through the hidden corridors of Japan's forgotten history, draws to its gentle close. We find ourselves standing once again at the threshold between the known and unknowable, between the documented and the mysteriously absent from all records. The stories we have shared tonight exist in that liminal space where historical fact meets the deeper truths that facts alone cannot capture, where the rational mind encounters mysteries that require other ways of knowing, the silver-eyed ones who walked among the early emperors, the whispering stones of Asuka that continue their ancient songs, the vanished temple of Mount Koya, where monks achieved impossible enlightenment, the Jade Empress whose reign was erased from time itself, the celestial cartographers who mapped invisible stars, the mirror makers who captured souls in bronze, the floating gardens that fed thousands from the surface of a lake, and the shamans who spoke the languages of bear and snow wind. All these represent facets of a hidden history that suggests our ancestors possessed knowledge and abilities that have been forgotten, suppressed, or deliberately abandoned. Perhaps these stories reflect a truth that conventional history cannot acknowledge, that human civilization has not followed a simple path of linear progress. From primitive ignorance to modern enlightenment, perhaps there have been peaks of understanding that were subsequently lost, technologies that were abandoned, and spiritual capabilities that were sacrificed in favor of other forms of development. The gaps and inconsistencies in the historical record may represent not mere accidents of preservation, but evidence of deliberate choices to forget what had become too dangerous or too profound for ordinary comprehension. The recurring patterns in these tales suggest that knowledge itself may be cyclical, appearing when consciousness is prepared to receive it, and withdrawing when that readiness fades. The silver-eyed ones departed when humanity chose independence over guidance. The Jade Empress's scrolls were burned when their contents were deemed too advanced for safe preservation. The shamanic traditions of Hokkaido faded when the modern world no longer had space for those who walked between realms. Each disappearance represents not loss, but transformation. Knowledge returning to the hidden dimensions from which it originally emerged. In our contemporary world, where scientific materialism has largely displaced spiritual ways of knowing these ancient mysteries, serve as reminders that reality may be far stranger and more multidimensional than our current paradigms suggest. The electromagnetic anomalies of the Asuka stones, the metallurgical impossibilities of the Yamashiro mirrors, the astronomical accuracy of the Heian star maps, all these phenomena point toward technologies and understandings that operated on principles not recognized by modern science. Yet perhaps the most important message embedded within these forgotten histories is not about the specific technologies or abilities that were lost, but about the different relationship with reality that made such achievements possible. The ancient Japanese, who communed with silver-eyed beings, who built temples that transcended architectural limitations, who created mirrors that reflected more than physical images, all shared a worldview that recognized consciousness as an active participant in shaping reality rather than merely a passive observer of predetermined phenomena. This participatory consciousness, which modern cognitive science is only beginning to rediscover, may have enabled our ancestors to perceive patterns and possibilities that remain invisible to minds trained in purely analytical thinking. The shamans who communicated with animal spirits, the astronomers who mapped invisible stars, the farmers who created floating ecosystems all demonstrate ways of knowing that integrate rational analysis with intuitive insight, scientific observation with spiritual awareness. The cyclical nature of knowledge suggests that these ancient capabilities may not be permanently lost, but rather dormant, waiting for conditions that will support their re-emergence. The increasing interest in consciousness studies, the growing recognition of ecological interconnectedness, and the development of quantum physics that acknowledges the role of observation in determining reality all point toward a gradual rediscovery of principles that our ancestors took for granted as we conclude tonight's journey through the shadows of forgotten history. Consider the possibility that sleep itself represents a return to that participatory consciousness where the boundaries between self and world become permeable. In dreams, we routinely experience phenomena that mirror the abilities attributed to ancient shamans and mystics. Telepathic communication, travel beyond physical limitations, and access to knowledge that transcends ordinary learning. The stories we have shared tonight serve as bridges between the waking world of historical documentation and the dream realm, where deeper truths reveal themselves in symbols and narratives that speak to the unconscious mind. As you drift into sleep, you enter a state of consciousness that may be more similar to that of our ancient ancestors than to our ordinary waking awareness. A state where the impossible becomes merely improbable and where lost knowledge can resurface. In the language of dreams, let the whispers of the Asuka stones carry you into sleep, where time folds upon itself and past and future converge in an eternal present. Allow the gentle wisdom of the Jade Empress to guide your dreams toward understanding that transcends the limitations of written records. Feel the presence of the shamans who learned to navigate between worlds, their ancient knowledge flowing through the dream realm where all consciousness ultimately converges. The hidden history of Japan reminds us that the past holds mysteries that our present understanding cannot fully comprehend, but perhaps does not need to comprehend in order to benefit from their subtle influence. Some knowledge works best when it remains just beyond the reach of analytical thought, operating through intuition and inspiration rather than direct instruction. As the volume of this story gradually fades and your consciousness descends into the restorative depths of sleep, carry with you the recognition that you are part of a continuous stream of human awareness that stretches back through all the forgotten civilizations and lost wisdom traditions that have contributed to the mystery of consciousness exploring. itself through countless forms across infinite time. The shamans and emperors, the craftsmen and astronomers, the mystics and innovators whose stories we have shared tonight, live on not only in fragmentary historical records, but in the deeper patterns of consciousness that connect all human experience across cultures and centuries. Their discoveries and insights flow through the collective unconscious, surfacing in dreams and sudden inspirations, in moments of creative breakthrough and spiritual insight. Sleep well, knowing that you dream not only your own dreams, but participate in the larger dreaming of consciousness itself, where the boundaries between individual and universal awareness dissolve into the ocean of being from which all knowledge ultimately emerges, and to which it eternally returns. Thank you for joining me on this gentle journey through the hidden passages of history. May your dreams be filled with ancient wisdom and your rest be deep and restorative. Until we meet again in the realm where stories live beyond the reach of time, sleep peacefully in the embrace of mysteries that continue to unfold across the infinite expanse of dreaming awareness. Good night.